or I want to show something that doesn't work. All right. But what this should look like is, we have some memory. Let me do it on this one. There we go. You have to close that out. But see how it creates the clusters as clusters 1 through 5? So you got to go back to the previous window, to this window, and hit preview, and it'll show you.
Okay.
Okay. But then you could download this into Excel and then look at it in Excel. And if you want to create a marketing campaign, if you score by cluster and you know what offer you want to give to your heavy truck buyer, now you have multiple marketing offers that you can send out. Final thing I want to show you is, let me reopen this. There's also, on the right, the ability to look at predictors by order of importance. If you click on that, you can look at which predictors are really driving differences in the clusters. That includes fuel capacity, horsepower, and curb weight.
This is a clustering of the technical specifications of the cars? Or this is some kind of clustering
over there,
the
cluster
people?
comparison.
Now, there's no people in here.
This?
There's no cars.
Then do predictor
So all it's saying
inputs,
is,
the top
here's
one.
the attributes
too.
which differentiate one cluster from another.
Okay, so yes, 5 types of cars.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that the customer will think of it as 5 types of cars.
They may not, but for
Nobody
our
ever-
purposes, as sort of a shorthand, we're going to assume for now that there's 5 different types of cars that someone will buy. If we melt the customer information in, we might find that we get a far better cluster with better silhouetting if we have 10 types of cars. This is just a starting point. The idea is to pump up this number here. See the silhouette indicator right here? You want this to be as close to the end of this chart as possible, okay? Meaning excellent clustering. By the way, if I wanted to, I could go back through and I could redo this and just read in a couple of fields. And rerun this and get a different clustering outcome. See how it went up a little bit? And sometimes it doesn't change, and now I'm only defining 2 types of cars, right? I could play with this to my heart's content. The bottom line is, I want to increase that silhouetting factor. The silhouetting factor, that the best one I got before was 0.49. This is 0.51. I'm going to keep playing with the inputs until I get a silhouetting factor as close to 1 as possible. Okay? Let's go a little further. New topic. Now we're going to go into classification modeling. Before I go further, is everyone good on clustering and what we accomplished here?
What does silhouetting of 1 look like?
It just
separate.
This, when you click on it, a silhouette of 1, this would be off the chart all the way up to here. That indicator would be all the way up to 1. That's very hard to achieve, though.
Means the
And then you have so few variables in there, it's not really a descriptive cluster.
means the clusters really don't overlap very much at all.
Right, that
right?
means they're perfect,
They're
but
like
they may not be that
heterogeneous.
descriptive.
Right.
So, you know, if I reduce the number of variables, my silhouetting goes up, but it's not that descriptive. I could differentiate into heavy versus lightweight vehicles. I don't know if that's enough for me to market on.
Right.
It's a balancing act.
But sometimes you may have one dominant factor there, then so you can retain it or take it out. For in using a car's example, let's say who's buying a car in terms of gender, maybe 80% male. So you may have that silhouette very high, 80% and create a segment there, but you don't know when.
You know what you're talking about preference mapping. I want you to do preference mapping when you go home. I'll give you 2 things. Preference mapping and conjoint analysis, which means figuring out what people will buy based on their demographics. Okay? So people have done studies and they figured out that men like different types of cars from women. If you add age, then you've got another factor. And if you have marital status, you've got yet another factor. You're trying to figure out which demographic factors drive vehicle purchases and what's the attribute of the people they're selecting.
But is that a good thing to introduce those factors at the beginning of an analysis, or kind of put it in later on, like you kind of do this analysis, then introduce the factor later on?
I'm okay with introducing it in the beginning, but the idea is you want a good silhouette so that the clusters differentiate well. Okay? You saw the silhouetting factor 0.5. That's really what you should be managing to. Some people do clusters and they're poorly defined. The silhouettes are like 0.2, which means those little, remember those pictures I showed you? That means the clusters are kind of encroaching on each other, and you've got what we call overlap. You don't want overlap. You don't want your marketing to go to the wrong person. So let's go, we're going to go into classification mode now. Before we do classification modeling, we'll talk a little bit about text analytics. So, if you remember that telecommunications example with the cell phone